Hi there, my name's Lockie. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer, and it's great to have you with us. In this video focused on the implementation of Purview Information Protection, we are going to be looking at three key areas. The first is the classification of data for protection and governance. The second, how we review and analyze data classifications more broadly. And the third, focused on sensitive information types, sometimes called SITs. We'll be taking a look at those SITs in detail because this is how we actually go through and create classifiers to be able to work out if something is sensitive or not. As part of the information protection framework, this is part of the Protect Your Data phase. Within the slide here, you can see a bit more information, so feel free to pause the video if you'd like to learn more. You can also head on over to learn.microsoft.com and check the documentation for more details on the protection framework broadly. Now, the first place we need to begin is the classification of data. There are a number of different reasons why we would need to ensure that we can identify data in key broad strokes, but most of it comes down to either protection, preventing it from going in certain locations, or governance, ensuring that we know where the data has ended up. Across this particular chunk of the video, we are going to be looking at how data classification supports the ability to actually get effective protection and governance, how we can identify different sensitive information types, especially useful where in structured data we may have some variability. We will look at how we can go through and describe various trainable classifiers. Training is going to be an interesting methodology you can use to identify things that are a bit more unique to your organization. And then I'll show you a little bit about how to actually create those trainable classifiers themselves. Let's get ourselves started. Now, data classification comes in two key areas when it comes to Microsoft Purview. We can either choose to classify data using a sensitive information type or a SIT. Think a structured pattern. If you have something that is always 3 letters followed by 6 numbers, or there is always a pattern of 12 digits that is supported by some key element, this gives you a way to identify that pattern within documentation, within various chat logs, these sorts of things. This is strictly distinct from a trainable classifier. When we are working with a trainable classifier, we are more interested in unstructured content. Think a broad stroke designed for a template. This would be an example of something that we would apply a trainable classifier to. If there isn't a clear, predictable mechanism under which to identify it, such as a credit card number or an ID number, a trainable classifier gives us an alternative methodology. So if we're looking to identify where contracts or resumes are present in your environment, this can be a great way to use artificial intelligence to learn from current examples and identify future ones when they pop up. Now, these methods are complementary. It's never one or the other, it's usually both. We'll choose the one that matches the content that you need to detect and protect based on each individual piece of content. Now, I want to ensure that you understand that when you are actually applying these sensitivity labels, it's part of a broader piece of the environment. So consider SITs as just a starting point for us. Now, the SITs themselves, we need to go through and define them either using the broad stroke ones that Microsoft has already defined. We have hundreds of different pattern matching ones available for you, or where you define something custom. There's a few different ways that we can define our sensitive information types using regular expressions, keyword matching, checksums, or a dictionary of words that are common across multiple different data sets. There are things beyond this as well. Whilst custom SITs are very useful, they give you a clear consistency, built-in SITs gives you the ability to identify that internal information nice and clearly. They can be used across DLP, auto-labeling, retention policies. Essentially, we can use them across the Purview stack to have consistency across the different layers we have access to. Now, trainable classifiers, because they are focused on unstructured content that a SIT wouldn't easily be able to identify, there's no consistent string we can search for. We instead use machine learning to train on real-world examples and then effectively give you an output that is easily used to identify that document again. Two different types are available. Pre-trained are where everyone generally starts. Think offensive language. That can have context surrounding it that is not necessarily about the language itself, more about the general surrounds of how that thing was said. Source code's easy to identify as another example of a pre-trained classifier. But custom classifiers, they're a little bit more specific. If you have some sort of internal contract structure or financial reports that you put in a specific format or always come with some sort of certain phrasing to them, effectively by feeding sufficient examples into a trainable classifier, we can identify where those come through. There are some restrictions on the use of trainable classifiers broadly, though. Make sure that you understand before you go down the path of a trainable classifier that it does not work on double encrypted content. If you are looking to go through and identify things within general auto labeling strategies or communication compliance, great use of the pre-trained classifier for offensive language, that is a perfect use case. But if you are using encryption, you'll need to look at some other methodologies. Now, when you do need to go down the path of creating a custom trainable classifier, just remember this is not going to be a small undertaking. There's some great information available if you're looking for supplementary around how this can be done over on Microsoft Learn. You can view that over at learn.microsoft.com and check out the docs. But to give you a high level, the first thing you need to do is create and collate enough sufficient examples in a SharePoint library that we can actually understand what good looks like. What should be identified by this classifier? The easier thing to do is then provide enough samples of what is not a part of this classifier. Essentially, these two in step, providing sufficient examples of what is good and what is not to be matched by this, that's really where we need to start. The initial training process itself and the preparation of that training data, this is where we begin. But there are a couple of gotchas as you go through. And we need to actually not just set this as a one and done. It requires refinement. So you need to go through and analyze the data. AI will do the initial work, and then you need to test it. Make sure that users are reviewing and adjusting for accuracy over time. Once the classifier is ready and you're confident in its level of accuracy, also remember, it's about a 24-hour rollout here. This is not something that is a one and done in anger. You need to make sure that you are building out this over time, and it cannot be templates or examples. It must be real examples of the documents you wish to classify. Once you do have all of this in play, though, there's not a lot else to it. Essentially, if you can get this together, you can create a custom classifier based on something that is specific to you. Now, that's all kind of a great starting point. But once we identify this information, what do we do with it? What are the next things that we need to focus on when we are actually building out our data classification plan? Next, I want to focus on how we review and analyze data across the protection stack. Within this piece of the video, we are going to be focusing primarily on how we actually interpret the reports we get back, i.e. we need to make sure you understand that when we give you information about how things are behaving, you can identify what needs to happen next. We're going to look at how labeling actually functions. Data Explorer and Content Explorer are available to us to be able to work through some of the different scenarios there. And then I'll talk a little bit about user activity within the Activity Explorer. Think of this as a starting point to understand how people are behaving within the environment broadly. All right, let's start with our reports. When we go through and we are looking to review the classification of information within our environment, there is a number of different pre-built reports that are available for you in Purview. These are designed more for things like trend analysis. So consider this as a starting point and a way to understand where there's potential gaps. So classification trends, that's looking on how sensitivity labels are being utilized. Protection coverage, this is looking about where potential areas are not being covered by policies that instead you might intend them to be used. Each of these cover a range of different scenarios and can be used for a bunch of different things. But key use cases include being able to identify trends, to look at how things are being applied over time, to take a look at things like user adoption, and being able to understand where people are actually effectively utilizing this across different workloads. One area of use for this is underutilization. If you are concerned about a portion of the business that may be underutilizing some of the labeling procedures that are actually in place, this gives you a way to quantify that and identify where this underutilization may actually be occurring with real workloads, people, those sorts of things. Now, if the reports aren't cutting it and you don't get the information you're looking for there, don't forget that there is still the traditional data and content explorers available. Think of this less focused on how things are being implemented and more where the data is in the first place. Data Explorer itself is focused on a tenant-wide view, and we're looking at different labeled items. So if you want to understand where the data lives and how it's being accessed, a great place to begin. The Content Explorer is a little bit of an older approach. It's more focused on a per location view. So if you need to go into a specific SharePoint, mailbox, site, something like that, it gives us the ability to drill down to that level. Both of these tools are designed to just surface the risks to you, to show some place that data may be unexpectedly stored or find where things may be available but they really shouldn't. Remember that this level of sensitivity, this metadata, this is highly sensitive and should be administrative only. You must have the proper permissions to be able to view this. This is not available to general users, and there's a number of different things that we can apply. Now, the reports themselves have a range of different filtering capabilities applied to them as well. So we can go through and ensure that when we are actually building it out, we can filter it by, say, sensitivity label, SIT, location, these sorts of pieces. For example, if you have a HR folder where you are concerned that in OneDrive, that maybe there's no labels being applied, this is a way that we can actually analyze that and quantify where those areas need to be improved. On the contrast to the Data Explorer, Activity Explorer is focused on the same thing, but user interaction. So we're less interested in where the data is directly, we're more interested in how users are utilizing that data. So we're focused on where content is being applied correctly, where we're seeing the matches and rules being used, these sorts of key things. This is great for looking at data usage, being able to understand where events are being fired, being able to validate where sensitive data is potentially being moved to unsanctioned locations, or more correctly, confirm that the data is not being moved to unsanctioned locations. There are different ways that you can track the information in this, but it gives you a great way to be able to go through and check alignment. What does and does not align with intended DLP rules, policies, and protections you've put in place. Now, as part of this, there is also a great AI-driven insights feature currently in preview. This allows us to utilize Security Copilot. Security Copilot is an ecosystem tool that allows us as a security team to focus in on particular areas that are really critical to what we're looking at there. For more information on the Activity Explorer, feel free to head on over to the Microsoft Learn documentation. There is an extensive amount of additional things around how Content List Explorer works and some of the different retention periods within here. Also, do keep in mind, from a management perspective, activity data is typically limited to between 30 and 180 days. If you need to keep it for a longer period of time, make sure that you are integrating with some sort of external tool, such as Defender XDR, to pull that information and store it for a longer period. All right, so we've got our information and we've got our mechanisms to explore it. How do we actually go through and create sensitive information types? The thing we're going to be leveraging here. Now, sensitive information types, because there are so many pre-built within the Microsoft ecosystem, hundreds that are available to you, the best place to begin is to look at the work that's already being done. I'll talk through the difference between the built-ins versus the custom ones that you look at, and we'll talk to a couple of scenarios there. We'll look at different custom sensitive information types and how exact data matching can function. This one's an interesting one because it's more focused on our database ecosystem rather than traditional file stores. Then we'll take a look a little bit of document fingerprinting and keyword dictionaries as well. Sensitive information types are our place to begin. So let's think about it. If you needed to go through and identify a unique HR document that followed a clear pattern where there's some individual piece that identifies that, a sensitive information type is a perfect scenario. Maybe there's an identifying number at the top or some sort of clear classifier that we can pull through. These built-in sensitive information types that are available from Microsoft, of which there are over 300, give you a managed mechanism. For common things such as US social security numbers or banking numbers, sensitive information in terms of the medical sphere, even lists of diseases that may be identified for medical data, these are built and maintained by Microsoft and ready for you to go. Don't worry, they can be modified. So if you find something that is in the default pattern that needs customization, filtering, or restrictions, you can go through and modify those yourself. It's a great way to be able to build things out and actually start through a remixing process rather than having to go from scratch. Honestly, the built-in sensitive are designed primarily for working with regulated data, things that there is some sort of common regulated type that we already need to work with. There are named SITs that are available as well. Structured personal information like names and addresses can be used as part of this to be able to identify where those things have come through, where there's a clear pattern match we can work with. Custom types can be tempting to use immediately, but my recommendation from working with customers is to look at the built-in first. See if the thing that you are trying to identify is already available within the built-in types. If not, unique organizational data can easily be identified as long as there is a consistent and clear pattern we can leverage. Now, custom sits, because they are fully configurable, come with a bunch of different options and categories we can leverage. These range anywhere from a keyword-based setup, a regular expression-based setup where we can define the pattern of the string, all the way down to things like fingerprinting to be able to identify certain types of documents that may not match otherwise. These are best where you need high accuracy and a low level of false positive, but are not necessarily something that we are going to use in every single scenario. I want you to think about the use of sensitive information types more in a way that is focused around the ways in which we would want to build something out that is unique to us. An employee ID number or an invoice number structure, something that is truly unique and is easy to identify there. Now, EDMs. These are a special type of SIT that is focused on that database structure. I'm going to show you an example in the demo a little bit later of one way we could use this to be able to identify a pattern focused around employee HR data. So we'll use that as a way to look at high accuracy there. Now, whilst you get ease of use with those built-ins, and that's why we start there, don't ever discount that ability to go through and create custom types. There are still great ways that we go through, especially where we have very strict accuracy requirements where we can use those additional custom types instead. Now, when you do make the decision to create a custom type, there's a couple of different ways that we can approach it. Ultimately, once you have defined your primary match, we now need to think about what's going to surround it that's going to ensure that we have a high level of accuracy. So each of the custom SIT components are really focused on that. So start with that primary pattern, but then immediately think about additional evidence around it that will give you a higher level of confidence. If we are identifying a bank account number, would the word account be nearby within, say, 300 characters either side? We can adjust this proximity as part of it as well to make sure that we're identifying it. That additional evidence doesn't necessarily just need to be keywords either. There's a number of different types that are currently supported. Additionally, you can actually adjust your confidence level. So if this is only a low confidence match, but is part of a broader structure, so if we see this in combination with X, Y, or Z, we know this is going to match our particular sensitive type, it still has value. Think about different ways in which you can actually work within those custom types there. But also know that when you're actually going through and creating these pieces, there is more to it than just broad setup. The management is going to be a key component, and over time you may need to adjust things like confidence level, may need to take feedback in place, or adjust it as policies change over time. Now, there are a number of different primary types we can look at, and the first one I want to examine in more detail is the keyword dictionary. A list is a common thing that we can put into a sensitive information type, but a large list of terms that you use more frequently. Think product names for the company or certain code names that are used for projects, even client lists. This is probably more of a candidate for the dictionary format. We support up to a 1 megabyte uncompressed initial file upload with 1 keyword per line. And as long as you can have something that is quite scoped, we don't want to use outdated or broad terms, and that you have a way to standardize it. So terms for compliance are in one, legal for another, etc. We can use these dictionaries across multiple different sensitive information types. Essentially, they themselves can act as either a reinforcement or a keyword match, or they can be the sensitive information type itself. Over time, you will need to refine and work on these dictionaries. All of the rules we talk about are never set and forget. You'll need to adjust them and potentially add or remove things from the dictionary, so make sure you come up with a versioning mechanism to be able to track that over time. Now, exact data matches are the next one I want to focus on, and they're a little different. Effectively, an EDM is focused more on a database structure, where we have a clear structured data source and a schema we can define with potential sensitive information types within that schema itself. We essentially want to be able to ID these with a high level of confidence. When we create the schema and the SIT, we essentially do it all in one go. This new experience is how 99% of you are going to experience it. But if you have been working with Purview for a while, you may know the older experience, which is a little bit simpler, a little bit safer, but focused on just 10 EDM SITs per tenant. We've given this new mechanism so we can extend this out to more different areas. Now, there is an important little restriction that is in place. Number one, we can go up to 100 million rows to be integrated with sensitive information types in the EDM category. Additionally, each EDM needs to have its own schema. There's no sharing amongst different SITs. So this is going to be something you define for very specific scenarios. The employee HR data I'll show off as an example. When we do need to create one, there's also another piece of the puzzle that's a little bit unusual. You create your SIT itself, and then you actually need to hash and upload the data. I'll show you in the demo exactly how this works, and I'll show you what it looks like and some of the different prompts that come up around this, because it is a little unusual comparative to other sources, which are more focused on you providing information after the fact to test. Once you do have a valid EDM produced, you will need to go through and ensure that the mapping has worked well, that the schema is as defined in the proper way, and that we can validate it. So the validation can be applied across a range of different areas. So it can be a very useful place to roll things out where we need that extremely high precision, but we've also got a very clear schema to follow. Continuing along with our SITs here, our next is document fingerprinting. Now, fingerprinting is a little unusual because it's structure that we're looking for here. Think a template. If there is a clear pattern in the layout, but not the keywords, a standard form structure, but not form content, we can essentially upload a sample document, typically a blank form, and use that as a starting template. That starting template then allows us to set detection rules about when we think we've found this in the environment. The system will extract that fingerprint from the template and use that to find other files that match the layout. There's a lot of really useful scenarios for this, but it is certainly supported across the main M365 suite. If you're looking to do this within Teams and those sorts of places, there are some restrictions in place, so do keep an eye out exactly where you need to implement this. All right, now that we've got our baseline in place, we're going to go through and I'll show you a little bit about how this actually functions. We're going to create a custom SIT using regular expressions. Then we'll adjust the confidence level. So we'll play the scenario of you've gotten some feedback and it's matching a little bit more often than we expected. We'll also go through and create a keyword dictionary SIT, and we'll test that out to make sure that it's working correctly and behaving in the way that it should. Sensitive information types, because they allow us to identify and protect critical data, can be used for a range of scenarios. So we're going to go through and use them to help identify a custom piece of information, an employee ID, as well as some health-related data using some of the different strategies we have. We'll start with the regular expression-based pattern structure as a beginning point, though. First, we need to go in the Purview portal, through to our solutions, and then we need to navigate through to information protection. The information protection solution is where we'll find things like policies that we wish to imply. It's where we create sensitive information types, and we can go through and create different classifiers for information as well. We'll get ourselves started by jumping straight in, and immediately the tour has opened up the policy menu for us. There are a few different types of policies. We can push them out manually, we can have them auto-labeled, essentially different approaches that we can take. But we also do have a number of different classifiers that are there. Now, we're interested specifically in creating a sensitive information type first, but we'll take a look at all of the different options that are available in the classifiers. First is a trainable classifier. Trainable classifiers are useful where we have some sort of sample documentation that we can leverage. So that's where we'd create those. Sensitive info types are what we'll be coming back to in a moment, so I'll show those off in a tick, but think patterns. And an exact data match are focused on structured data matching. Again, we will focus on that sensitive information type as a starting point. There is also some other classification methodologies you can use around policies and when we need to collect certain pieces of information. We'll jump now into the sensitive info types, and we're going to start creating this custom one focused on Contoso employee IDs. Now, one of the important things you need to remember when it comes to sensitive info types is because it is essentially just a string match, it doesn't have context by default. We need to provide that context. So you want to be as specific as possible with the thing that you are searching for. Take a look at some of the examples that we see from the myriad of Microsoft built-in sensitive information types that are here. Physical addresses, different shared access keys, different pieces of information out of Azure that are hyper-specific. Essentially, we can identify with an extremely high level of confidence that when we find one of these types of information. You want to be trying to achieve the same sort of thing. So if you don't know where to start, feel free to take a look at those built-ins and use them as a remix point, a kickoff. From here, we'll hit Create Sensitive Info Type, which allows us to go through and make something customized. You could also choose to refactor one of the existing built-ins if you prefer. Right, first things first, we need to give this a name. This needs to be a fairly friendly name that an administrator can easily identify because remember, SITs can be reused for multiple purposes. We're going to call this one Contoso Employee IDs, and then we'll add a quick little description that gives it an idea of why this thing exists. When you are going through and you're putting this in, make sure that description provides more clarity about when this should be utilized. So if there is some nuance, make sure that you provide that info there. Now, at least one pattern is required when you create a sensitive info type, but note at least, not at most. You can choose the pattern that you wish to work with, and it needs to essentially have the primary element that we're going to use to match. So for our purposes, we are going to create a regular expression-based pattern, the thing that we are going to search for across documents, emails, messages, etc. First of all, you're presented with a load of different options, and the top one is the confidence level. How unique is this string? Think about it. Is this something that if you see this particular pattern actually get triggered, you know with 100% or near 100% confidence that this is a true match? Based on your definitions, you can choose either a high, medium, or low confidence match. Lower the confidence, where you think there may be some ambiguity and where it may not be a definite that we found this, but instead a maybe. Maybe it requires human intervention to get a little bit of context. Now, we've chosen a regular expression as our starting point here. This gives us an easy way to identify the structure of a string. So a certain number of letters followed by a certain number of numbers is what we're going to do here. We'll take our Contoso IDs and we're going to put in a pattern for how we can identify this particular structure. Get our regular expression pattern here. A to Z, 3 characters, 0 to 9, 6 characters. You can identify this either as a string isolated in the midst of other pieces of information or as a word. There is some nuance between these two, and there's details here on how the regular expression actually pops up. Make sure you read through it and the supported regex patterns that are available in the Microsoft Learn doco when you're actually implementing a real sensitive info type yourself. There is a lot of nuance and a lot of different controls that you have to define when and how something actually gets identified. Next, you have the ability to add validators. These are essentially checksum functions, things that we can run to make sure we have found the right thing. For a common industry standard of where this might come into play, think a credit card number. Credit card numbers not only follow a strict pattern, but actually have to resolve to a specific mathematical equation. So we can use that as a way to provide an additional check to make sure that we have found the right thing. Next, we see character proximity and supporting elements. We're going to start with the supporting elements first because it makes the other one make a lot more sense. And we're going to go simple with a keyword list. A list offers the ability to do, well, as it sounds, to create a list of keywords that we know that if we see these nearby, we are more likely to have found the correct piece of information. So I see the word employee or ID nearby the string match I've worked with, we can have a much higher level of confidence that we found an employee ID. Makes sense. The critical piece is the character proximity. We found that supporting element. Where is the distance that we want to search? By default, this is 300 characters either side. But depending on your scenario, 300 characters may not cut it. It may be too small because the document's large, or it may be significantly too large because we're only ever expecting 20 or 30 characters either side. You can essentially choose how tight you want this. The tighter the search, the less likely we are to trigger this. I've set this to 100 for my scenario as it gives me a little bit of flexibility for some of the things that I want to show off. Once we're ready to go, we do have the ability to put in additional checks. Things of it starts with, it ends with, little pieces of additional checks that we can do. But we can hit create when we're ready, and now we have our place initially set up. There is still a few more things that we need to do. For example, we need to make sure that we can actually go through and create it. Note that it's selected high confidence as the recommended setup. This is based on the different type matches that we have available. Multiple types with different confidence will give you different recommendations. And then once it's all complete, we can simply finish off the creation process here and get our sensitive info type ready to go. You will want to make sure and you do some validation with your sits. It's never good to just let them loose into the world. You need to ensure that they are going to match the things you're expecting. So expect that you'll need some sort of sample data to check things out. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later in the demo. All right, now that our sensitive info type has been created, we can confirm that everything has gone well by simply doing a search. I'll search for Contoso here, and we'll take a look and see if we can find that entity type that we just made. Here we go. We open up the flyout and we see a description, the one we set before, the confidence level. Essentially, it's all here. Now, if something's not right, and don't think this is necessarily a mistake, sometimes it can just be that it's triggering too often or the confidence level is not as high as you thought. Turns out finance has something that's an almost identical thing for their invoices. We can go through and we can edit things like patterns, additional keyword matches, or even just the confidence level on the data set that we have here directly. If I hit the edit key, I'll be able to go through and select a different confidence level. Maybe medium is closer to what I'm actually expecting. And we can use that. It'll update the recommended confidence level, and then we can simply hit save to update it. Sensitive information types, more broadly, are not designed to be this one and done static location. You'll update and tweak them over time as you find edge cases and want more nuance in your structure. Next, let's go through and create an exact data match. It's a different structure focused on databases, and it takes a little bit more extra work to get ourselves going. We're going to head straight back across into our information protection stack. This solution is going to be where we're doing most of our work, and EDMs were one of the other options that we saw when we were creating that sensitive info type before. So we'll load up our little flyout here, and let's go through and start the process for creating that exact data match. All right, we've just hit the Create EDM button, and immediately we are presented with a wall of text. I recommend that you either pause the video and read through this, or when you're in the process of creating it, read this carefully. Creating an exact data match is absolutely not something you can do in isolation. It requires collaboration with your database team and the people who understand the data sources that you are looking to leverage. There is a lot more to it than just selecting a button and hoping for the best. To learn more, take a look at the documentation you see here, or head on over to Microsoft Learn to see what each of the different steps will behold. The main thing we are interested in, though, is the creation of the classifier itself. So let's get ourselves started and get that classifier creating. Now, first thing we do need to do is name our EDM classifier. There's a lot to this, but ultimately it's the same thing that we are finding everywhere. It needs to be a friendly name so we can identify it, and so when we want to use it later, it becomes clear as to why we're leveraging it. Note that the name we went with is employee DB. This should hopefully tell you a lot about where exact data match is typically used, database files. Now, you can upload a file containing sample data, fairly common approach, and we have some sample data available within the Microsoft Purview documentation. But we're instead going to define the schema manually. You can absolutely do this if you know your data structure well. What we need to do is effectively define all of the columns that we would expect to see in this database. So for us, since we are creating an employee database, it's going to be 4 key things: name, birth date, address, and employee ID. Now that last one's important because we just created a sensitive information type focused on employee ID identification. So this can act as our primary element. All exact data match scenarios require at least one primary element. We can have things as single or multi-match tokens, but the primary element is the more key piece that we need to think about. Essentially, what is the key? What is the unique value that no matter what we'll be able to identify uniquely within the data set here? We can choose a sensitive info type from one of our built-ins, or simply by searching for Contoso, we can find that one that we created earlier. Now, once we do have this sensitive info type selected for the column, we can declare that as a primary element. And once we've done that, simply hit Next, and we now have our EDM mostly complete. There are a couple of extra pieces of nuance we can set here, and some of these can be quite useful. There are scenarios, because of the way in which we fetch data, that we may encounter these more in terms of query form. So we might want to actually go through and ensure we're ignoring certain delimiters. Think brackets surrounding something, or quotation marks, dashes, this sort of stuff. All you need to do is select these from the list, and then when Purview is doing the check for this sort of exact data match, it will essentially ignore these pieces. So if we find a match that is with or without a hyphen, with or without a period or a space, with or without brackets on either side, we can still ensure that these get caught by the EDM profile. You can also put in custom delimiters here, so if there is something that you don't see in the list, simply add it in, separated by commas. Now that we've got all of these pieces in, the last piece is just determining how we're actually going to detect that we found a primary element. We have the same narrowness, so wide or narrow, where are we searching? We can search on a row level, or we can search on the primary match alone. We can even dictate how far either side we search, same as we did with our general sensitive information type. To learn more about the different types of detection rules, especially where you may want to set something to medium or high, there's great advice over in the Microsoft Learn documentation, especially within the architectural space. EDM classifiers allow for that precise matching against a data source, so it's a perfect example within the employee DB to use it there. Now that we've created it, you can go through and upload the sample data to complete the rest of the steps for verifying your EDM. But we can also go through and just copy the schema. A great place to begin if you need to go through and just test it out with some sample files further down the track. All right, let's create the last type of classifier I want to look at, and that is a dictionary-based SIT. Sensitive info types that are focused around the dictionary take a little bit of a different approach. Effectively, we do the same thing we saw earlier with the keyword list, but now we're focused on something that's a bit more usable, specifically reusable. Dictionaries are designed to not be used for just a single sensitive info type, and in fact, a reusable structure that we can continue to utilize over and over and over again. So let's go through and create our first dictionary. All right, we've headed back to the information protection solution, and we're going to go through and create this new dictionary-based sensitive info type, so still a SIT. Once we're in here, we can simply hit create, and it will take us across to the same portal page that we saw before, same wizard. Next, we need to give this dictionary a name. It needs to be something that's going to be easy to identify, especially because this is usable in a lot more scenarios than just a list. We're going to call this one diseases, because this is something that when we see this in a Contoso context, we know that this is a potential disease list. But next, the dictionary is going to be applied not with just a list of potential diseases, and in this case, think flu, influenza, cold, that sort of stuff. We're going to apply some secondary pieces to it, and the verification will provide the context of why we're searching for this in the first place. We have a standard high confidence level here. We've got the standard sort of diseases dictionary as our primary element, but the supporting element is the critical piece. Why do we need this? Because we are looking for where employees are calling in sick and then someone accidentally forwards that information to someone they shouldn't. So by adding a secondary keyword list here as the supporting element, we can search for things like sick or illness, those sorts of words. Essentially, the absence reasons that someone may give. So we've got employee, absent, reason, and we'll add in sick as the last one. With these in combination, we now have a list of baseline diseases that represent a relatively low risk, but still PII, and we have a list of accompanying phrases that we may see nearby that say, someone has called in sick. If we see that email forwarded or under certain conditions sent, we now know that's personally identifiable information. You can think of the different scenarios where a dictionary like this could be really useful. The project codes were something that we gave before, customer names, this sort of stuff. Where you need to reuse something in this way, we have the ability to do so through the use of that dictionary. All right, now that we've created all of these different sensitive info types, let's go through and make sure they're working as they should. We're going to take a look at each of them and just run them through a quick verification. Now I've got a sample file here, which is essentially just a sick message sent in by an employee. It contains a little bit of information, but just enough to trigger the different types that we're looking at. First of all, when I hit the test button at the top of the page here, this will load up a test suite view. It allows me to upload a file, and we are testing specifically employee IDs. Let's grab that now. All right, we've uploaded the text file, and once I hit next, this will go through and perform a match. Essentially, it's just going to double check to say, hey, based on this, would this match correctly? And the answer is yes. Because I have this set to a medium level of confidence, we've triggered a low and medium, effectively all the way up to medium of an employee ID with a supporting element of both employee and ID nearby. Everything's working as intended. Now we can take a look and see what other sensitive info types we have. If I do a quick search over here for the other one that we just created, disease, might need to refresh the page, but you can see there's actually a number of different built-in elements. This can be useful if you want to test out some scenarios that are more focused on generic use cases. Disease lists are actually captured under one of our built-ins. But we'll go with the custom list that we built out earlier, and let's see if we can verify that it's going to capture that this employee has called in sick and that everything's working as intended. We'll bring up the diseases list here, and then once it's ready, we'll hit that test button and perform the same actions again, uploading a simple test file to just confirm that the match is going to work accordingly. And with that, we now have our match results. And we can see because this has a high confidence maximum, we have triggered flu and influenza based on an employee being a supporting element nearby. Essentially, we have confirmed that everything is working as intended. as part of this, we created 3 different mechanisms for detecting sensitive data: regular expressions-based patterns, exact data match classifiers, and a dictionary-based pattern. These tools give you easy ways to be able to enforce mechanisms around how and when something should or should not be controlled, and being able to identify that information critically. Throughout this video, we have looked at 3 key areas. We looked at the broad data classification and the protection and governance framework that surrounds it. We've reviewed how we actually analyze data and what the ways in which we apply protection are across the data classification suite, and shown you a little bit about sensitive information types, a critical mechanism we use to be able to manage content across Purview. I want to thank you for joining us for this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.